The morning of November 24, 1974, began like any other for Donald Johanson and Tom Gray as they walked across the sun-scorched badlands of Hadar in Ethiopia's Afar Triangle. The two paleoanthropologists had been searching for weeks, their eyes scanning the ground for the telltale glint of fossilized bone among the volcanic sediments. The temperature had already climbed past 90 degrees, and the landscape stretched before them in undulating waves of brown and ochre, a desolate terrain that had once been a lush lakeside forest teeming with life. Johanson, then, a young researcher from the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, had almost decided to return to camp when something caught his eye. It was a fragment of arm bone, unmistakably hominid, lying exposed on a slope where recent rains had washed away the covering sediment. He knelt down, his heart beginning to race, and, within moments, found more pieces scattered across the hillside: a piece of skull, fragments of pelvis, pieces of rib, vertebrae, and, most remarkably, an almost complete femur and tibia. Over the next 3 weeks, Johanson's team would recover 47 bones representing about 40% of a single skeleton, an unprecedented find in the field of human origins research. That evening, as the team celebrated back at camp with cold beer and the Beatles' "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds" playing on a tape recorder, someone suggested naming their discovery after the song. The name stuck. Lucy, as she became known to the world, was approximately 3.2 million years old, and she would fundamentally transform our understanding of where we came from. What made Lucy extraordinary was not simply her age or the completeness of her skeleton. It was what her bones revealed about a critical moment in human evolution, the point at which our ancestors stood upright and began walking on 2 legs while their brains remained little larger than those of modern chimpanzees. Lucy stood just over 3 feet tall, weighed perhaps 60 pounds, and had a brain roughly a third the size of a modern human's. Yet the angle of her femur, the shape of her pelvis, and the configuration of her knee joint told an unmistakable story. This small, ape-brained creature had walked upright across the African savanna more than 3 million years before the present day. Lucy belonged to a species Johanson would name Australopithecus afarensis, meaning southern ape from afar. She was not human, but she was on the path that would eventually lead to humanity. Her body represented a kind of biological incubator, a transitional form carrying within it the seeds of what we would become. Understanding Lucy meant understanding the crucible in which humanity was forged. The story of human origins is ultimately a story of transformation, of bodies reshaping themselves across millions of years in response to changing environments and new challenges. It is a story written in bone and stone, in the microscopic analysis of tooth enamel and the careful reconstruction of ancient landscapes. And it is a story that begins long before Lucy, in a world so different from our own that it seems almost alien. Between 6 and 7 million years ago, somewhere in the forests of Africa, a population of apes began to diverge from their closest relatives. On one side of this genetic split were the ancestors of modern chimpanzees and bonobos. On the other were creatures that would eventually give rise to humanity. The precise nature of this common ancestor remains a mystery, though fragments of fossil evidence provide tantalizing glimpses into this distant past. In 2001, a team led by French paleoanthropologist Michel Brunet announced the discovery of a skull in the Jurub Desert of northern Chad. Named Sahelanthropus cadensis and nicknamed Tumai, which means hope of life in the local Goran language, the specimen was dated to approximately 7 million years ago, making it the oldest known member of the human family tree. The skull presented a puzzle. It had a small, ape-sized brain, but its face was relatively flat and its canine teeth were smaller than expected for an ape of that era. Most significantly, the position of the foramen magnum, the hole at the base of the skull where the spinal cord enters, suggested that Tumai may have held its head in a position consistent with upright walking. The Jurub Desert where Tumai was found is today one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, a landscape of shifting sand dunes and scorching heat. But 7 million years ago, this region was a mosaic of forests, woodlands, and lake margins, home to crocodiles, elephants, horses, and a diverse array of primates. It was in this verdant environment that the earliest members of our lineage took their first tentative steps toward humanity. The journey from Tumai to Lucy spans nearly 4 million years, and the fossil record for this period remains frustratingly incomplete. Yet several key discoveries have begun to fill in the gaps. In Kenya's Tugen Hills, a team led by Bridget Sennett and Martin Pickford discovered fossils of Ororantugenensis, dated to approximately 6 million years ago. The partial femur they recovered showed adaptations for upright walking, though the creature likely still spent considerable time in the trees. From Ethiopia came Ardipithecus ramidus, a species made famous by the partial skeleton known as Ardi, discovered by Tim White's team and announced to the world in 2009 after 15 years of painstaking analysis. At 4.4 million years old, Ardi predated Lucy by more than a million years and presented a very different picture of early human evolution. Her pelvis showed clear adaptations for upright walking, but her feet retained a grasping big toe, suggesting she was equally at home in the trees. Her brain was about the same size as a chimpanzee's, and her teeth suggested a diet of fruits, nuts, and other soft foods found in a woodland environment. What emerges from these early fossils is a picture of experimentation, of multiple lineages of apes trying out different combinations of traits in response to changing environments. Some, like Ardipithecus, remained largely committed to forest life while beginning to explore life on the ground. Others ventured further into open habitats, their bodies gradually reshaping to meet new challenges. The environmental backdrop to this story was one of dramatic change. Beginning around 10 million years ago, global climate patterns began to shift, becoming cooler and drier. In Africa, this translated into the gradual replacement of continuous forest with a patchwork of woodland, grassland, and savanna. The apes that would become our ancestors found themselves in an increasingly fragmented landscape, one in which the ability to travel efficiently between patches of forest may have provided a significant advantage. The shift to upright walking, or bipedalism, was perhaps the most consequential adaptation in human evolution. It freed the hands for carrying food, tools, or infants. It reduced exposure to the sun during the hottest parts of the day. It allowed for more efficient long-distance travel across open terrain. And it set in motion a cascade of anatomical changes that would eventually transform every aspect of the human body. Lucy's skeleton reveals just how profound these changes were. Her pelvis, shorter and broader than that of an ape, provided a stable platform for the trunk during two-legged walking. Her femur angled inward from hip to knee, bringing her feet beneath her center of gravity. Her spine curved in an S shape, balancing her head directly over her pelvis. Every bone in her lower body had been reshaped by the demands of walking upright. Yet Lucy retained many ape-like features as well. Her arms were relatively long compared to her legs, and her fingers were curved in a way that suggests she still spent time climbing in trees. Her brain, at around 400 cubic centimeters, was barely larger than that of a modern chimpanzee. She lived in a world of predators, from lions and leopards to hyenas and crocodiles, and the safety of the trees must have remained an important refuge. The Hadar region where Lucy lived was very different from the arid badlands it would become. Reconstructions based on fossil plants and animals suggest a mosaic of gallery forests along rivers and streams, interspersed with more open woodland and grassland. Lucy and her kind would have found food in both environments, eating fruits and leaves when available, but also exploiting underground tubers, seeds, and perhaps occasional meat when plant foods were scarce. Evidence of what Lucy and her contemporaries ate comes from multiple sources. The shape of their teeth, with thick enamel and large chewing surfaces, suggests a diet that required significant processing of tough or hard foods. Microscopic wear patterns on tooth surfaces indicate they consumed a variety of foods with different textures. Chemical analysis of tooth enamel reveals the isotopic signatures of the plants they ate, showing that Australopithecus afarensis consumed a mix of forest and grassland foods, a pattern quite different from modern chimpanzees, which feed almost exclusively in forests. The social life of Lucy's species remains more speculative, though some inferences can be drawn from the fossil record and from comparisons with living primates. The degree of size difference between males and females, known as sexual dimorphism, provides clues about mating systems and social structure. In Australopithecus afarensis, males were substantially larger than females, perhaps by as much as 50%. This pattern is typically associated with intense competition among males for access to females, suggesting a social system quite different from the relatively egalitarian pair bonding seen in some modern human societies. The discovery of multiple individuals at Hadar, including a collection of fossils known as the first family that may represent 13 or more individuals who died together, suggests that Australopithecus afarensis lived in social groups. The circumstances of this mass death remain unclear, but possibilities include a flash flood, a catastrophic collapse of a riverbank, or some other sudden disaster that overwhelmed an entire group. Lucy's species endured for nearly a million years, from approximately 3.9 to 2.9 million years ago. They ranged across eastern Africa, with fossils found in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania. They were extraordinarily successful by any measure, adapting to a range of environments and persisting through significant climate fluctuations. Yet eventually they disappeared, replaced by newer forms that would carry the human story forward. The period between 3 and 2 million years ago represents one of the most complex and fascinating chapters in human evolution. The African landscape filled with a diversity of hominid species, some with massive teeth and jaws adapted for processing tough, fibrous foods, others with smaller teeth and larger brains that presaged the emergence of our own genus, Homo. Mary and Louis Leakey, the legendary husband and wife team who pioneered paleoanthropological research in East Africa, made many of the key discoveries that illuminated this period. Their primary excavation site was Olduvai Gorge, a steep-sided ravine in northern Tanzania that cuts through 2 million years of sedimentary history. The gorge was formed relatively recently, within the past 500,000 years, by geological faulting and stream erosion. But the rocks it exposed contain one of the most complete records of early human evolution anywhere in the world. On July 17, 1959, Mary Leakey was surveying the slopes of Olduvai when she spotted fragments of bone eroding from a cliff face. Careful excavation revealed an almost complete skull with enormous teeth and massive jaws. The Leakeys initially called their discoveries Injanthropus boisei, East African human of Boise, honoring Charles Boise, one of their financial supporters. Later analysis would place this specimen in the genus Paranthropus, recognizing it as one of the robust Australopithecines, a lineage characterized by extreme adaptations for processing tough plant foods. The skull, commonly known as Zinj or Nutcracker Man, had a sagittal crest, a bony ridge running along the top of the skull that anchored powerful chewing muscles. Its molars were the largest of any known hominid, with thick enamel adapted for grinding hard foods. Yet its brain was small, barely larger than Lucy's despite being more than a million years younger. Paranthropus represented an evolutionary experiment in specialized feeding, a lineage that invested heavily in the ability to exploit resources unavailable to other hominids. The robust Australopithecines persisted for over a million years, eventually dying out around 1 million years ago. Their extinction coincided with a period of increasing climate variability and the expansion of their more adaptable relatives, the early members of our own genus, Homo. But, for a long time, multiple species of hominids coexisted across the African landscape, each pursuing a different ecological strategy. Just 2 years after finding Zinj, the Leakeys discovered a very different kind of hominid at Olduvai. This one had a larger brain, smaller teeth, and hand bones that suggested a precision grip capable of fine manipulation. Louis Leakey, along with colleagues Philip Tobias and John Napier, named this species Homo habilis, handyman, linking it directly to the stone tools that had been found at Olduvai and other sites. The announcement, published in 1964, was controversial. Many scientists felt the fossils were too fragmentary, too similar to Australopithecus, to warrant placement in our own genus. Yet subsequent discoveries would vindicate the Leakeys' interpretation, revealing Homo habilis as a transitional form between the Australopithecines and later humans. The stone tools associated with Homo habilis represent one of the most significant technological innovations in the history of life on Earth. Known as Olduvai tools after Olduvai Gorge, they first appear in the archaeological record around 2.6 million years ago, predating the earliest known Homo fossils by several 100,000 years. This temporal mismatch raises the intriguing possibility that earlier hominids, perhaps late Australopithecines, were the first toolmakers. Olduvai tools are deceptively simple in appearance. They consist of cobbles from which a few flakes have been struck, producing sharp edges suitable for cutting meat or scraping hides. The flakes themselves were also used as tools, their razor-sharp edges capable of slicing through tough materials that would defeat teeth and fingernails. Yet making even these simple tools requires a sophisticated understanding of stone fracture mechanics, the ability to select appropriate raw materials, and the motor control to deliver precisely aimed blows. Evidence that early hominids used these tools to process meat comes from several sources. Cut marks on animal bones at archaeological sites show the distinctive pattern of stone tool butchery. Some bones have been cracked open, presumably to access the nutritious marrow inside. And the locations of these sites, often near ancient lake shores and stream channels, suggest that early hominids were taking advantage of animal carcasses left by predators or scavenging kills made by other carnivores. The shift toward increased meat consumption may have been a crucial factor in the evolution of larger brains. Brain tissue is metabolically expensive, consuming roughly 20 times as much energy per unit weight as muscle tissue. A chimpanzee-sized brain can be supported by a diet of fruits and leaves, but the enlarged brains of early Homo required a richer source of nutrition. Meat, with its concentrated calories and essential fatty acids, would have provided exactly this kind of high-quality fuel. The relationship between diet, tool use, and brain evolution formed a feedback loop that drove human evolution forward. Better tools allowed access to more meat. More meat provided the nutrition needed to support larger brains. Larger brains enabled the invention of better tools. This cycle of mutual reinforcement accelerated over time, carrying our ancestors toward ever greater cognitive complexity. By 1.8 million years ago, a new species had emerged that represented a dramatic leap forward in brain size and body form. Homo erectus, known from spectacular finds in Kenya, Georgia, and later Indonesia and China, had a brain roughly twice the size of an Australopithecines. Their bodies were much more similar to modern humans than any previous hominid, with longer legs, shorter arms, and a torso designed for efficient long-distance walking and running. The most complete early skeleton of Homo erectus was discovered in 1984 by Kamoya Kinyu, a member of Richard Leakey's field team, near Lake Turkana in Kenya. Known as Turkana boy or Nariakatone boy, the skeleton belonged to a youngster who died around 1.5 million years ago at approximately 8 to 11 years of age. Despite his youth, he already stood about 5 feet 3 inches tall and would have reached perhaps 6 feet had he lived to adulthood. His body proportions were essentially modern, well suited for life in the hot, open environments of the African savanna. Turkana boy's skeleton revealed something unexpected about human evolution. His narrow pelvis, similar to that of modern humans, would have imposed constraints on the size of offspring that could pass through the birth canal. Yet his brain, though larger than earlier hominids, was still only about 65% of adult Homo erectus size at the time of his death. This suggests that Homo erectus babies, like modern human infants, were born at an earlier stage of brain development than other primates, requiring extended care and nurturing after birth. This pattern of secondary altriciality, as it is called, fundamentally changed the nature of hominid childhood and social life. Unlike ape infants, which are relatively independent soon after birth, human babies are helpless for years, their immature brains requiring extended development outside the womb. This extended childhood creates both challenges and opportunities. It demands intensive parental investment and cooperative care from others besides the mother. But it also allows for a longer period of learning and brain development, during which the child absorbs the skills, knowledge, and cultural traditions of their community. The demands of raising dependent offspring may have driven the evolution of pair bonding and cooperative breeding in human ancestors. Unlike most other great apes, humans typically form long-term pair bonds, with fathers investing substantially in their offspring. Extended family members, particularly grandmothers, often play crucial roles in childcare. This pattern of cooperative breeding is rare among primates but is characteristic of many successful social species, from wolves to meerkats to naked mole rats. Evidence for when these social patterns emerged remains controversial, but some clues come from life history patterns preserved in fossil teeth. Like tree rings, teeth preserve a record of their development in the form of microscopic growth lines. By analyzing these lines in fossil teeth, researchers can estimate the age at which individuals reach developmental milestones like weaning and dental maturity. These analyses suggest that early Homo erectus had a faster life history than modern humans, developing more quickly and probably living shorter lives. The extended childhood characteristic of modern humans evolved gradually over the course of our evolutionary history. Homo erectus was also the first hominid to leave Africa, spreading across much of the Old World in a remarkable expansion that began around 1.8 million years ago. The earliest evidence of this diaspora comes from the site of Manasai in the Republic of Georgia, where a series of skulls and partial skeletons document the presence of early Homo erectus at the gates of Europe. The Dmanisi hominids were surprisingly small-brained for their time, suggesting that the initial expansion out of Africa did not require particularly advanced cognitive abilities. From the Caucasus, Homo erectus spread eastward through Asia, eventually reaching Indonesia and, perhaps China by 1.5 million years ago. The famous Java man fossils, first discovered by Dutch anatomist Eugene Du Bois in 1891, represent some of the earliest evidence of hominids in Southeast Asia. Du Bois had gone to Indonesia specifically to search for the missing link between apes and humans, inspired by evolutionary theory and the observation that the region was home to orangutans. His discovery of a skullcap and femur at a site called Trinil launched the scientific study of human evolution in Asia. The spread of Homo erectus across the Old World coincided with a significant technological innovation, the Acheulean stone tool industry. Named after the French site of Saint-Achel, Acheulean tools are characterized by large bifacially worked implements, particularly teardrop-shaped hand axes that represent a substantial advance over earlier Oldowan technology. Making an Acheulean hand axe requires careful planning, precise control over the sequence of flake removals, and an understanding of the final form one wishes to create. The earliest Acheulean tools appear in Africa around 1.76 million years ago, at sites like Kokosili in Kenya. They spread across Africa and into Western Asia and Europe over the following million years, eventually becoming one of the most widespread and long-lasting tool traditions in human history. Remarkably, the basic form of the Acheulean hand axe remained essentially unchanged for over a million years, from approximately 1.7 to 0.3 million years ago. This conservatism has puzzled archaeologists, who have proposed various explanations ranging from cognitive constraints to the social transmission of traditional forms. The use of fire represents another crucial innovation that transformed human evolution. Fire provides warmth, extends activity into the nighttime hours, offers protection from predators, and enables cooking, which dramatically increases the nutritional value of many foods. Cooked food is easier to chew and digest than raw food, allowing the extraction of more calories with less effort. Some researchers have argued that cooking was essential for the evolution of large human brains, providing the extra energy needed to fuel our metabolically expensive nervous systems. Evidence for the controlled use of fire is difficult to identify in the archaeological record, and the timing of this innovation remains hotly debated. Some researchers point to burned patches at sites like Kubi Fora in Kenya, dated to around 1.5 million years ago, as possible evidence of early fire use. But the clearest evidence comes from much later, around 400,000 years ago, when hearths, burned bones, and other fire-related features become common at archaeological sites across Africa, Europe, and Asia. By the Middle Pleistocene, roughly 500,000 to 300,000 years ago, human populations had become increasingly diverse and regionally distinct. In Africa, populations were evolving toward the modern human condition. In Europe and Western Asia, a distinctive lineage was emerging that would eventually give rise to the Neanderthals. In Eastern Asia, descendant populations of Homo erectus were pursuing their own evolutionary trajectories, some of which would have surprising outcomes. The Neanderthals represent perhaps the best known of our hominin relatives, thanks to a wealth of fossil and archaeological evidence accumulated over more than 150 years of research. The first recognized Neanderthal specimen was discovered in 1856, 3 years before Darwin published On the Origin of Species, in a limestone cave in the Neander Valley of Germany. The skeleton, including a distinctive skull with a low, elongated braincase and prominent brow ridge, would become the type specimen for an entire species, Homo neanderthalensis. Neanderthals were sophisticated hunters who occupied a vast range across Europe and Western Asia, from the Atlantic coast to the Altai Mountains of Siberia. Their bodies were built for the cold, with barrel chests, short limbs, and large nasal passages that helped warm and humidify frigid air. Their brains were as large as or even slightly larger than those of modern humans, though differently shaped, with larger visual areas and smaller frontal lobes. Archaeological evidence reveals that Neanderthals were skilled toolmakers who produced a distinctive style of stone tools known as Mousterian, after the French rock shelter of Le Moustier. They hunted large game including mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, horses, and deer. They cared for injured and elderly group members, as evidenced by healed fractures and the survival of individuals with serious disabilities. They buried their dead, sometimes with apparent grave goods, suggesting at least the beginnings of symbolic behavior. The site of Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq provides some of the most compelling evidence for Neanderthal compassion and social complexity. Excavations by Ralph Seletsky in the 1950s and 1960s revealed the remains of 10 Neanderthal individuals spanning a period from about 65,000 to 35,000 years ago. Several of these individuals showed signs of significant injuries or disabilities that would have made independent survival impossible. Shanidar I, an adult male, had been partially blinded, had lost the use of one arm, and showed signs of other injuries, yet had survived for many years after these traumas. His survival could only have been possible with extensive care from others in his group. Even more intriguing was the apparent discovery of pollen from medicinal plants in the sediments surrounding one burial, suggesting that Neanderthals may have placed flowers on their dead. While subsequent reanalysis has raised questions about whether the pollen was a later contamination, the possibility remains that Neanderthals engaged in ritual treatment of the deceased, a practice long thought to be unique to modern humans. While Neanderthals were flourishing in Europe and Western Asia, our own species, Homo sapiens, was emerging in Africa. The oldest known fossils assigned to our species come from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, where excavations led by Jean-Jacques Hublin revealed skulls with modern human faces but elongated, archaic-looking brain cases. Dated to approximately 300,000 years ago, these fossils pushed back the origin of our species by more than 100,000 years and suggested that modern human anatomy evolved in a mosaic fashion, with different features appearing at different times. Other early Homo sapiens fossils come from sites across Africa, including Omo Kaibish in Ethiopia, dated to around 195,000 years ago, and Herto, also in Ethiopia, dated to approximately 160,000 years ago. These finds suggest that our species evolved somewhere in Africa, though the precise location remains unclear. The geographic spread of early fossils has led some researchers to propose a model of Pan-African evolution, in which geographically separated populations exchanged genes and ideas, contributing different traits to the emerging modern human form. The earliest modern humans looked much like us, though perhaps slightly more robust. Their skulls had high, rounded brain cases with relatively vertical foreheads, reduced brow ridges, and prominent chins. Their bodies were more lightly built than those of Neanderthals, adapted for life in warmer climates. And their brains had reached the modern size range, averaging around 1,350 cubic centimeters. Yet for roughly 200,000 years, these anatomically modern humans remained confined to Africa and the immediately adjacent regions of the Middle East. Archaeological evidence suggests that early Homo sapiens made stone tools similar to those of other contemporaneous hominids and lived in ways that would have been broadly familiar to their ancestors. The human revolution, the explosion of art, symbolism, and technological innovation that would eventually transform our species, was still to come. The Middle Stone Age of Africa, spanning roughly 300,000 to 30,000 years ago, provides the first tantalizing hints of symbolic behavior among early modern humans. At sites like Blombos Cave in South Africa, excavations led by Christopher Henshelwood have revealed evidence of ochre processing, bone tool manufacture, and, most strikingly, engraved geometric patterns on pieces of ochre. These engravings, dated to around 75,000 years ago, represent some of the oldest evidence of abstract symbolic expression in the archaeological record. Also at Blombos, Henshelwood's team discovered pierced shell beads, personal ornaments that would have communicated information about individual or group identity. Similar beads have been found at sites across Africa and the Middle East, suggesting that the practice of personal ornamentation emerged relatively early in our species' history. Such ornaments imply a concern with appearance and social identity, with communicating information to others about who one is and where one belongs. The emergence of symbolic behavior marks a crucial threshold in human evolution. Symbols allow us to communicate abstract ideas, to share knowledge across generations, and to coordinate complex social activities. Language, the most powerful symbolic system of all, may have emerged during this period, though the evidence remains indirect. The anatomical prerequisites for speech, including a descended larynx and the neural machinery for language production and comprehension, were likely in place by the time of early Homo sapiens. But whether these capacities were fully realized remains unknown. Around 70,000 years ago, modern humans began to spread out of Africa in significant numbers, eventually colonizing every continent except Antarctica. This diaspora was not a single event but a complex process involving multiple waves of migration, periods of expansion and contraction, and extensive interaction with other human populations already established outside Africa. The route of the initial expansion appears to have followed the coastlines of the Arabian Peninsula and South Asia, with populations eventually reaching Australia by at least 65,000 years ago. Evidence for this early coastal migration comes from genetic studies of living human populations and from archaeological sites like Majbib in northern Australia, where stone tools have been dated to approximately 65,000 years ago. The colonization of Australia required crossing at least 90 kilometers of open ocean, even during periods of low sea level when more land was exposed. This feat of seafaring represents one of the earliest evidence of technological innovation in the service of exploration, suggesting that early modern humans possessed both the cognitive abilities and the social organization necessary for complex planning and coordination. As modern humans spread across Eurasia, they encountered other human populations that had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years. In Europe and Western Asia, they met the Neanderthals. In Eastern Asia, they may have encountered late surviving populations of Homo erectus or its descendants. And, scattered across Asia and Oceania, they found a newly discovered species, the Denisovans, known primarily from ancient DNA extracted from fragmentary fossils found in Siberia. The Denisovans were first identified in 2010 through genetic analysis of a fingerbone found in Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. The DNA preserved in this small fragment was sufficiently complete to reveal that the individual belonged to a previously unknown population of hominids, distinct from both Neanderthals and modern humans but more closely related to Neanderthals. Subsequent discoveries at the same site, including teeth and additional bone fragments, have provided more information about this mysterious species. Though the Denisovan fossil record remains sparse, ancient DNA tells a remarkable story. Denisovans contributed genetic material to modern human populations across a wide swath of Asia and Oceania. Indigenous Australians, Melanesians, and some Southeast Asian populations carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA, indicating substantial interbreeding between Denisovans and modern humans somewhere in Asia. This genetic legacy includes variants that may have helped modern humans adapt to high-altitude environments, including a gene called EPAS1 that helps Tibetans cope with low oxygen levels. The interaction between modern humans and Neanderthals has been studied in even greater detail, thanks to the complete Neanderthal genome sequences that have been obtained from multiple individuals. These genetic studies reveal that Neanderthals and modern humans interbred on multiple occasions, with the result that most non-African humans today carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. This genetic inheritance includes variants affecting immune function, skin and hair characteristics, and possibly even cognitive traits. The nature of the relationship between Neanderthals and modern humans remains a subject of intense debate. Were the two species competitors, with modern humans eventually displacing their cousins through superior technology or larger numbers? Did they coexist peacefully in some regions, occasionally interbreeding when individuals from different groups met? Or was the process more complex, with different outcomes in different places and times? The archaeological record provides some clues. In some regions, Neanderthals appear to have adopted innovations similar to those of contemporary modern humans, producing personal ornaments, using pigments, and developing new stone tool technologies. This pattern of cultural borrowing suggests that the two species were not completely isolated from each other, that ideas and techniques could flow between them even if genetic exchange was limited. The eventual extinction of the Neanderthals, around 40,000 years ago, coincided roughly with the arrival of modern humans in large numbers in Europe. But the process was probably gradual, unfolding over thousands of years as Neanderthal populations contracted and fragmented. Climate change may have played a role, with the extreme cold of the last glacial maximum making life difficult for populations already under pressure. Competition with modern humans for resources, even if indirect, may have tipped the balance against the Neanderthals. The last refuge of the Neanderthals appears to have been the Iberian Peninsula, where sites like Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar preserve evidence of Neanderthal occupation until perhaps 28,000 years ago. Here, at the southwestern tip of Europe, small groups of Neanderthals clung to existence for millennia after their relatives elsewhere had disappeared. The final Neanderthals left behind engravings on the cave walls, geometric patterns that may represent an independent flowering of symbolic behavior in this isolated population. With the extinction of the Neanderthals and Denisovans, modern humans became the last surviving species of a once diverse human family tree. For the first time in millions of years, only one type of human walked the earth. This demographic monopoly allowed our species to expand into every habitable region of the planet, adapting to environments from tropical rainforests to Arctic tundra. The colonization of the Americas represents one of the last great human migrations. Current evidence suggests that people first arrived in the Americas sometime between 20,000 and 15,000 years ago, crossing from Siberia to Alaska via a land bridge exposed by low sea levels during the last ice age. From this initial foothold, populations spread rapidly southward, reaching the tip of South America within perhaps a few thousand years. The earliest Americans encountered a world teeming with large animals, from mammoths and mastodons to giant ground sloths and saber-toothed cats. Within a few millennia, most of these megafauna had disappeared, victims of a combination of human hunting and climate change at the end of the Pleistocene. The extinction of the Pleistocene megafauna transformed American ecosystems and forced human populations to develop new subsistence strategies. Similar patterns of colonization and extinction played out across the Pacific, as seafaring populations from Southeast Asia spread across Oceania in a remarkable series of migrations that began around 5,000 years ago. These voyagers, ancestors of modern Polynesians, developed sophisticated navigational techniques that allowed them to locate and colonize islands scattered across millions of square miles of open ocean. They brought with them domesticated plants and animals, transforming the ecologies of the islands they settled. The final human frontier was the remote islands of the Pacific and Atlantic. Madagascar, located just 400 kilometers off the African coast, was not settled until roughly 2,000 years ago, by seafarers from Southeast Asia. New Zealand, the last major landmass to be colonized by humans, was reached by Polynesian voyagers only around 800 years ago. These late settlements remind us how recently humans completed their global dispersal. Throughout this long journey, the human body continued to evolve in response to new environments and challenges. Populations living at high latitudes developed lighter skin, which allowed more efficient synthesis of vitamin D in conditions of reduced sunlight. Populations in different regions evolved distinctive facial features, body proportions, and other characteristics, adapting to local conditions while remaining members of a single, interbreeding species. The evolution of lactase persistence, the ability to digest milk sugar into adulthood, provides a particularly well-studied example of recent human adaptation. Most mammals lose the ability to digest lactose after weaning, but populations with a long history of dairying have evolved genetic variants that maintain lactase production throughout life. This adaptation arose independently in several populations, including Northern Europeans and East African pastoralists, within the past 10,000 years. Other recent adaptations include resistance to malaria in populations exposed to this disease, the ability to tolerate high-starch diets in agricultural populations, and the genetic changes associated with high-altitude living in Tibetans and Andean peoples. These adaptations demonstrate that human evolution did not stop with the emergence of modern humans but continues today, though cultural innovations have increasingly buffered our species from natural selection. The development of agriculture, beginning around 12,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent and arising independently in several other regions, represents the most profound transformation in human history since the adoption of hunting and gathering by our distant ancestors. Agriculture allowed the accumulation of food surpluses, which in turn enabled population growth, permanent settlement, and the development of complex societies. The transition to agriculture was not a sudden event but a gradual process unfolding over thousands of years. In the Levant, the region spanning modern Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and Syria, archaeological sites document the gradual domestication of wheat, barley, and legumes, along with sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle. Similar processes of domestication occurred independently in China, where rice and millet became staple crops, in sub-Saharan Africa, in New Guinea, and in the Americas, where maize, squash, and beans formed the basis of agricultural systems. The consequences of agriculture for human biology were profound. Diets became less diverse and more dependent on a few staple crops, leading to nutritional deficiencies and increased susceptibility to famine when crops failed. Crowded settlements and close contact with domestic animals provided opportunities for infectious diseases to emerge and spread. Skeletal evidence from early agricultural populations shows increased rates of dental cavities, infectious disease, and other health problems compared to their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Yet agriculture also enabled unprecedented population growth. World population, which stood at perhaps a few million during the Pleistocene, reached several hundred million by classical antiquity and has since exploded to nearly 8 billion. This demographic expansion was accompanied by increased social complexity, the development of writing and record-keeping, the emergence of states and empires, and, eventually, the scientific and industrial revolutions that have transformed life on Earth. The story of human origins is ultimately a story of transformation across multiple timescales. Over millions of years, the bodies of our ancestors were reshaped by natural selection, adapting to changing environments and new ways of life. Over thousands of years, cultural innovations accumulated, as each generation built on the achievements of those before. Over mere centuries, the pace of change has accelerated to a point where humans have become a geological force, reshaping the planet's climate, ecosystems, and even its future evolutionary trajectory. Lucy, the small, ape-brained creature who walked the Ethiopian highlands more than 3 million years ago, could not have imagined the descendants who would one day piece together her skeleton from fragments of fossilized bone. She lived her life in the moment, concerned with finding food, avoiding predators, and raising offspring. Yet in her bones were encoded the possibilities that would eventually give rise to art and science, to cities and civilizations, to the vast enterprise of human culture. The human body serves as a kind of incubator for the mind, providing the biological substrate from which consciousness, language, and symbolic thought emerged. Our distant ancestors were incubators in a different sense, their bodies carrying the seeds of what we would become, preserving and elaborating the genetic and developmental systems that would eventually produce modern humans. Each generation served as a vessel, transmitting the accumulated wisdom of the past while adding new variations that natural selection could test against the challenges of the environment. Understanding our origins is not merely an academic exercise. It reveals the contingency of our existence, the improbable chain of events that led from the first upright apes to the technological civilization we inhabit today. It illuminates our connections to the natural world, reminding us that we are products of the same evolutionary processes that have shaped every other species on Earth. And it provides perspective on the challenges we face, helping us understand ourselves as a species with particular strengths and weaknesses, capacities and limitations. The fossil record continues to yield new discoveries that challenge and refine our understanding. Every year brings new finds from Africa, Asia, and Europe, adding detail to the story of human origins and occasionally revealing entirely unexpected twists. The development of ancient DNA analysis has revolutionized the field, allowing researchers to access genetic information from individuals who died tens of thousands of years ago. New dating techniques provide ever more precise chronologies. And computational methods allow researchers to analyze data in ways that were impossible just a few decades ago. The story told here is necessarily incomplete, a snapshot of current understanding that will inevitably be revised and extended as new evidence comes to light. Some of the interpretations presented here are well established and supported by multiple lines of evidence. Others remain controversial, with different researchers reaching different conclusions from the same data. This uncertainty is not a weakness of the science but a reflection of the difficulty of reconstructing events that occurred millions of years ago from fragmentary evidence. What seems certain is that the human story is far more complex than early researchers imagined. Our ancestors were not a single lineage marching steadily toward humanity but a branching bush of species and populations, experimenting with different adaptations and ways of life. Modern humans did not simply replace all other hominids but interacted with them in complex ways, exchanging genes and, probably, ideas across species boundaries. And the emergence of modern human behavior was not a sudden revolution but a gradual accumulation of innovations over hundreds of thousands of years. The Earth's first inhabitants, understood in this broader sense, were the many species and populations that contributed to our evolutionary heritage. Lucy and her kind, the robust Australopithecines with their massive jaws, Homo erectus with their wanderlust that carried them across 3 continents, the Neanderthals with their cold-adapted bodies and caring societies, the mysterious Denisovans known mainly from fragments of ancient DNA. All of these were human incubators, carrying within them elements of what we would become. Today, as we face challenges that threaten the future of our species and our planet, understanding our origins may help us chart a path forward. We are a species shaped by millions of years of evolution in small, tight-knit social groups, yet we now live in a globalized civilization of billions. We are a species that evolved to respond to immediate, concrete threats, yet we now face challenges that unfold over decades and centuries. We are a species with an evolutionary heritage of competition as well as cooperation, of tribalism as well as empathy. The study of human origins reveals both our potential and our limitations. We are capable of extraordinary achievements when we work together toward common goals. We are also capable of terrible destruction when our darker impulses go unchecked. The fossil record is full of extinct species that failed to adapt to changing conditions. Whether our own species will be among them depends on the choices we make in the years ahead. The journey from Lucy to the present day spans more than 3 million years. In that time, our ancestors transformed from small, ape-brained creatures eking out a living on the African savanna to the dominant species on a planet they are rapidly transforming. This transformation was not inevitable. At many points along the way, our lineage could have taken different paths or simply gone extinct. The fact that we are here at all is a testament to the resilience, adaptability, and sheer luck of our ancestors. As we look to the future, we carry within us the legacy of all those who came before. Our genes bear the marks of millions of years of evolutionary history. Our cultures draw on traditions that extend back to the earliest human societies. Our minds, shaped by natural selection for life in small-scale societies, now grapple with challenges our ancestors could never have imagined.